We were expecting the Finance Minister, Tito Mboweni, to be outlining government's economic response to the COVID-19 crisis this afternoon. A teleconference was scheduled to start at 3 o'clock today. It was cancelled at around lunchtime. Ayabonga Cawe is the economic contributor for Newzroom Africa. Ayabonga, good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. All right, we were expecting quite a lot from the National Treasury this afternoon, but how would you rate government's response to the economic aspects of the COVID-19 crisis so far?
Afternoon to you, Stephen, and afternoon to the viewers. I guess by all accounts, certainly from where I'm sitting, there has been attempts to mobilize an effective response. If you think about, key supply chains linked to this response and some of the action that has happened. We've also seen measures taken on the tax relief side of things to the tune of about 15 billion rand. The agriculture, small-scale farmer relief, 1.2 billion rand, and about 1.2 billion rand also offered by some of our DFIs, the NAF about 200 million or so, and the IDC similarly about 700 million in a working capital facility. And so it seems a few resource commitments that have already been made. And if I tally up a bit about all of the ones on the fiscal side of things, they probably hover around 50 billion rand or so, give or take. And I think everybody would agree that that's, at this point, might be wholly inadequate for the scale of the challenge that we have here. So a lot of us, we're really waiting with bated breath and hoping to hear this afternoon from the Minister of Finance what other additional measures might be instituted here. We've also seen on the monetary side of things a cut in that repo rate of 100 basis points, about just over 1 billion rand in government bond purchases between February and March of this year, which really signals the start of the monetary stimulus in response to the COVID crisis. And so I think all South Africans are really waiting for that fuller picture that says, this is what we've done to this point, and we're hoping that, as the data on the spread of infection comes out, this is how the other additional actions might unfold. Because I can tell you right now, I think 50 billion at this point is probably going to be wholly inadequate for a challenge that might decimate our economy right into the hundreds of billions of rand.
Well, I mean, let's talk about hundreds of billions of rand, if only just because it's nice to talk about hundreds of billions of rand without having to talk about Eskom for a change.
Yes.
I've seen some economists who say that you need a stimulus of around 10% of GDP is what's happening in the United States. Other people are talking around 500 billion rands worth of stimulus. I think the tax take last year was 1.4 trillion. So, I mean, that just tells you how much money we're talking about. I mean, do you think it needs to be on that scale, or do you think those figures are overblown?
Look, I mean, I do think so. I think you do need it, probably not at those specific figures. But just to give you a sense, I mean, if you compare us to some of the BRICS countries, Stephen, who have, put in single digits worth of their GDP, I think around sort of anything between 1.5% and 3% of their GDP. If we had to intervene at similar levels, we would probably have to be putting in around 70 or 71 billion rand in 2018 prices. Now, the big question is, even that, will that be enough if we consider, the tough state that our economy was in already? And I think the other bigger issue maybe on the monetary side of things is we're probably going to need some communication about the size of the bond repurchasing program that the monetary authorities are going to take on. Because you've seen what happened with the downgrade. We might be chucked out now of the World Global Bond Index. And that's going to have massive implications on our ability and on the terms on which we borrow. And we are going to need to borrow at this point. And so there's a big question about what is going to be the size of the bond buying operations of the central bank in order to be able to at least bring the yields on long-term bonds back to levels that are at least manageable for our borrowing requirements as a government.
And Ayabonga, very quickly, if you can, although it's not an easy question to answer quickly, should we be going to the IMF? I mean, there's a huge political fight about that already.
I think that's a sideshow, Stephen. If you think about how much has been communicated in terms of the quanta of what we would go to the IMF for, I think it might be a level close to the special drawing rights that we have at the IMF, and that's about what, maybe around 1 billion rand or so that people have spoken about. Our drawing rights might be more than that. But 1 billion rand is about $1 billion US, I should say, is about, 18 billion rand in a crisis and a challenge that is going to require a response that numbers in the hundreds of billions. And so I do think that, yes, it's a nice debate to have, and I think all of us need to be very vigilant and critical of the Bretton Woods institutions if we consider their historic track record on the continent, decimating the state capacity that we are trying to rebuild now in South Africa, and all of the conditionalities to some of their loans. But, I think what has been placed on the table here is really marginal to the bigger fiscal resources that are required to respond to this challenge.